All right. Round two. Okay. We specifically chose specific games. I don't know how many times I can say specifically here today. Because of sort of the weight that it sort of holds for the entire proposal. Biosketches, on the other hand, have a lot of weight, mostly around investigators, but it is the opportunity for you to have the most voice about yourself. And so most people think of them as pretty dry, but they actually contribute significantly sort of to the process. So our objectives today are really just to complete a biographical sketch in NIH format that is compliant. I'll talk a little bit about some of the issues with that and making sure that it's compliant because it changes every couple of years. So I'll always check the rules. This is really geared toward, we talked about the different parts that go into your score. Can you hear me? Is that better? Okay. We talked a little bit about all the different things that contribute to your score. One of those being the investigator, right? So there's significance, innovation, approach, investigator, environment. This is where the investigator score comes from and is pulled directly from. And really sort of the big thing is that at one time biosketches were sort of the same. You used the same biosketch for every proposal you submitted, whether you were a co-investigator or the PI or whatever. They're all just essentially a CV. Now, that's not true. The biosketch really needs to be tailored to the specific proposal that you're doing so that to understand how you fit into the proposal itself. So these are the main questions that we're trying to answer as a reviewer on the investigator. So are they well suited for the project? If they're early stage, which I think a lot of people in this room would be considered early stage investigators, do they have the appropriate experience and training? So you may not have this mountain of productivity going into it, but you are an emergency physician, you work in the field, you have experience with this group of patients, and you have had some amount of training in research or methodology or statistics or some additional thing that sort of fits in that, or whatever it is that your sort of is your niche. When you look at all of the biosketches that might be in a large proposal, are there sort of complementary and integrated expertise? So you might have something where you're interested in high sensitivity troponins in the emergency department related to rule out of ACS, and so you want to make sure you have a cardiology on board or maybe a radiologist if you're going to be using a coronary angio-CT or those kinds of things. And so having those different components in there sort of to integrate the whole process is important. The other thing is sort of like, what is the org chart for your proposal, right? There's a principal investigator, the PI or PD, but there might be multiple, or you may be that you're going to be at different sites. In clinical trials, this sometimes is a little more sort of structured than it is in other types of proposals, but in general, you sort of want to know who's in charge of what. And the biosketches really set that out. Each person sort of says, this is my role, this is who I answer to, and those kinds of things. So basically, the biosketch is where all of this sort of feeds into that particular score, the investigator score. Like the specific aims, there is a recipe for the biosketch. The top of it includes the education and training. This is bachelor's degree in this and master's degree in this, residency, that kind of thing, maybe PhD or an MPH that went in that and sort of the orders and where you got those. We're going to talk a fair amount about this first section, which is the personal statement. That is where all of this information that I think is going to really drive that. Those questions about sort of how you fit into this project and how does the project sort of come together with all of the different investigators. And then positions and honors, and then contribution of science. And relatively recently, there used to be a section D, which was research support, sort of where you listed the current grants that you had or maybe the most recent past grants. The idea being that we talked a little bit about having even a small grant's important, mostly because if one person's willing to fund you, that sort of sets this precedent. Money begets money. And so if you're in there and they say, oh yeah, they were willing to give him money, he's probably okay. And you sort of go on to the next one. This is gone now. There is no research support section in the biosketch. That went away, I think, last year or the year before. But we'll talk a little bit about that down the stream. There is a way to sort of get at that question. So let's talk about section A, because this is sort of the high one. This is the personal statement. This is a first person thing. I am this. I have a background in this. My motivation for doing this is X. This is your voice, who you are, why you are the person to do this. Alice brought up a really good point that somebody sort of brought in their own sort of personal experience for something, and I think that's a place where this does. One of the things that I sort of routinely say is that I am motivated by problems at the interfaces of either specialties or disciplines within medicine. And so I live in those spaces, and so I sort of always have a theme around interfaces in my personal statement. That's just sort of who I am. Some other little detailed things. This really shows up on the first page, and I would recommend keeping it on the first page. You can write as long as you want. The whole document has to be 5 pages or less. But if you are reading this paragraph and you're well onto the second page, you've probably gotten somebody a little bit bored and don't want to read too much more. But here's where it's very important to be sort of tailored to the various types of projects and what your expertise is and what you are doing in the project. And I'm going to show you just some stock phrases. I show you this, and I have these in there. Honestly, as a reviewer, they make me absolutely crazy because I read them, and it's because I do this and I hear them, the same phrases over and over again. So maybe worth not copying them verbatim. But I've literally read this on like dozens of biosketches. I have demonstrated a record of da-da-da-da-da. I have expertise and experience and prepared me to lead the proposed project. I have read those things. I honestly don't feel strongly that they have to be those exact sentences, but that is the concept that you want to have. I would prefer, instead of having these very, what I would consider generalized statements, to say, I have a record of the following proposals that I've done, projects I've been on, things I've completed, and very specific, and relate them to things further down in your biosketch. Make it very, very specific. So one thing I like, and I've seen in many proposals, and I think it's important, this last one is this last sentence about sort of I've published several studies and led to these analyses and more studies, and that's the same role I'm going to do here. I really like sort of building up, this is my experience, and on this project, in bold print, I will be the lead investigator for the University of Michigan. I will be the co-investigator in charge of biostats, whatever your role is on the project, in like one big bold print that sort of demonstrates who you are. The other thing that I sort of find very important there is to sort of say, what is your relationship with the other people? Many times I've seen a lot of review comments come back that this team does not have an established record working together. They're all experts in their various fields, but they've never worked together, so we don't know that they gel. And so I have worked with the PI for the last 5 years, and link it to these are some of the products of that work. Or we've been working on this particular one for the last 2 years, or I have known this person for how long. And call off the different investigators in there. So that's another thing that sort of comes into this sort of last bit. So sort of bringing that a little bit all around here, which is this idea of like getting your personal professional motivations, who you are and why you do what you want to do. I am motivated by life-threatening infections and particular emphasis on medical device-associated infection, period. That is my sort of niche. That's what I really love to do. And this particular project feeds right into that or is a manifestation of that. You can tell sort of as you hear somebody talk about the things they love, they get very passionate, they get very enthusiastic. And if you write that way, that will sort of come through. And like I said, you want to really bring those specifics home. Connect to the citations and contributions to science, which we'll talk about in a minute, and point to them. After this personal statement, you are allowed to include 4 additional citations sort of relevant to that work, and I will usually call them out very specifically. On this work, this is relevant to this proposal for the following reasons, and my role on that was X. And then the last thing I highly recommend is if you are going to be the PI and you're putting this proposal in and you're gathering mentors, you're gathering people from different specialties, people will send you biosketches that they wrote for some other grant. It's exhausting to like keep changing your biosketch. There's a part of me that wants the biosketch to go back to when it was literally just a CV without any sort of real personal statement in it because it takes some effort to do this. So I would recommend asking if it's okay if you modify their personal statement so that it sort of fits with what you say. Because if they write it in and they say, I mean, I've had ones where it was written to be a mentor for somebody else's project and they had the other person's name, right? So drafting this is not any different than drafting mentor letters, right? Making sure it says exactly what you want to say. I am here to do the following. I will be doing the following. This is my role, and this is sort of how that is involved, and making sure. The other thing is making sure it's formatted properly. I work with a lot of engineers who do a lot of stuff with NSF or the Department of Defense, and they don't always write NIH-style biosketches. And so having that formatted properly can sometimes be an issue as well. So be willing to draft for your co-investigators and mentors. Couple of do's and don'ts. So we're on to section B. This is basically a list of your positions and your honors. It's important to include your present position with the dates and details, like how long you've been there, where it is, and those kinds of details. It's also good to be sort of pertinent professional memberships. It shows that you're part of that community, and you're sort of recognized in that. Lots of people have various honors, and I would say be very cognizant of what you are putting on there. Make sure it's relevant. So for instance, if I'm putting in a really detailed basic science grant where I'm looking at nanoparticles as a new antimicrobial, I don't usually put honors that I've had around my teaching. They're not very interested in that. But I might put something where we had an innovator award that sort of goes with those. So things along those. The last one is, people always ask questions about fellowships. Sometimes fellowships are considered an honor or award, or I'm a fellow of this academy, those kinds of things. If it's a training fellowship, it's better to go in the training table. So you might actually have something on the order of undergraduate, graduate, medical school, residency, and fellowship all in that training table, rather than as like an honor and award. Section C, this is the contributions to science. Essentially, this is an annotated bibliography of your work. If you've done a CV, it's not just a list of the publications, but really sort of how did they sort of contribute to the field? And they sort of require a couple of key things. This is sort of how all science is, right? What was the background? Sort of what was the issue that needed to be solved? What did you find? How did that sort of change the science going forward? And what did you do on that work? Were you the principal investigator on the work and you sort of conceived it and did all of the work? Or were you involved in one particular portion, particularly if it's critical to this proposal? Well, I'm going to be doing the same thing here. Again, you're sort of setting that tone for what is your expertise and how is it relevant to this project. You get 5 different contributions to science. So you don't need 5. You can do 1 or 2 or 3. And then you get 4 publications under each of those contributions. For some, you might have all of your publications listed in various forms of that. Others, you're going to want to sort of pick and choose. So sort of like, how do you choose your contributions? Again, this is just like the personal statement. You want to sort of tailor it to the grant. So I sort of have 2 different ways that I look at. I have sort of diagnostics that I work on, and then I have therapeutics. And so my Biosketch changes if the grant is much more on sort of diagnostics and diagnoses versus if it's more of a treatment-oriented grant. And I move the publications around. Sometimes, for a long time, I only had enough publications to fill the whole thing, and there wasn't any extra ones. And so the difference was just what did I put first? So my first contribution to science was sort of all the diagnostic ones. Ultimately, you'll build up your publication list, and it will sort of exceed what you would put in this space as you sort of talk more about it, and you get to have this link. You can use the NCBI website, put your bibliography on it, and they can click on that link to see all of your publications. I will say, and this has come up recently, at least according to our grant administrators, and I don't know if any of the other mentors have noticed this, you are not allowed to have hyperlinks in your proposal anymore. So it used to be you could have hyperlinks to different things. That's like gone. This is the only one you get to put in the proposal. So within a given contribution to science, the maximum number of citations you can have is 4. But again, you don't have to have all 4. It may be 1 or 2, especially if it's sort of a seminal paper or something sort of very interesting or new. There might only be 1 in that sort of contribution. But that may be very relevant to the project you're talking about. So it's more important to have it be very relevant to the project and only be 1 publication and sort of higher on the list than it would be to have sort of 4 publications that don't really fit. So you really want to sort of highlight the expertise and the productivity. Again, the other thing is It may not be pertinent to the project, but it may show that you've published with one of the other collaborators on the grant. And so that's some of the reason to say that it's there. Yes, we have a track record of working together. We can do it successfully and create a product. They actually have a description of products of scholarship, which is broader than the more narrow view of peer-reviewed publications. But in general, peer-reviewed publications are viewed more highly than non-peer-reviewed publications. I would highlight things where you've had a leadership role, so either senior author or first author publications, I would probably try to highlight more. And there's always sort of ways of like lumping and splitting in your contributions to science. So think very deeply about how you define your contributions to science. Sometimes it's better to have sort of one big contribution here, and here's the 4 publications that are really meaningful to that, than it is to have a whole bunch of them with sort of very small publications. Does that make sense? So everyone's going to be a little bit different, and you're going to change this for every single proposal that you do, which, like I said, is a little exhausting. This section D was the one where you could put in prior grants you were on. If you were the site PI for a multi-center trial, or you were a co-investigator, that looks good because you've sort of already been cited as being a leader and being able to contribute to projects like this. So that no longer exists, but you can add this little addition to your personal statement at the end of your personal statement. It can either go before or after those 4 publications. You can put after the one that says that lists relevant, ongoing, and recently completed research projects. And I think it says include, and then you can list them after that, and that's where those grants can go. I would say the thing is it really should be in the last 3 years. If it sort of gets beyond that, it doesn't look very relevant. Written and unwritten rules, follow the formatting, 5 pages max, keep it to the sections that are there. 5 contributions to science, 4 publications per contribution are maximums. If it's a very broad project, you want to show your breadth. If it's a very narrow project, show your depth, that kind of thing, sort of match up the sort of size of the project. It's okay to include other scholarship if it's very relevant, like podcasts and abstracts, particularly if you're doing a project that's very social media heavy and you have a very strong social media presence. That's not a bad thing to put in here. I have this as keep older funding if sort of needed and sort of very pertinent. If it's very large, you are the leader of a large P30 grant that has gone on. That looks good even if it is more than 3 years old, but for the most part I would be a little bit hesitant to go beyond 3 years. If anybody is not familiar, I'm happy, I'll have to build this up, but somebody in your program should help you. There is this My NCBI website where you can basically build all these things up. You can put all of your publications in there, you can write your statements, and then you can sort of like build them and point. I want these 4 publications with this thing, and I want these 4 publications with that, and it formats them and it generates a Biosketch. And so that you don't have to sort of reformat it every time. You just sort of say, okay, you just move the publications around sort of like a puzzle. Make sure you bold your name so they can find you. It's very easy to do that. A lot of people do that on their CVs. And then sort of the axiom is a sloppy Biosketch looks like somebody who does sloppy science. Wrong direction. All right. I think it's time for some small group things. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to read Biosketches. I know that we don't have as many as we had at the specific aims, and you're welcome to sort of go back to your specific aims if you still had questions or would like to get some more feedback on that. But if you're looking at the Biosketches, take a look at it and say, can you tell what the subject of the grant is from the Biosketch? Like, do you even know why this person's there and what they're doing on it? What is the PI's area of expertise? So the grant's about this. What is the PI on this? So like if that person's the PI, what do they do? And what's sort of unique, or why are they sort of in a special position to do this? I am uniquely suited to do X is a great way to sort of say that. And then what is their role? What are they going to be doing on this project? Can you tell that? Can you answer those questions from the person's Biosketch? Those are sort of the critical points. And I think that was my last slide. So I think we're, oh, go ahead.
I don't know if this is too basic of a question, but if you're early in your career and your Biosketch is going to be somewhat minimal, and you're applying for a grant, is it important to get somebody with more experience on your grant application? Is that like a dumb question?
No, it's not a dumb question. You've sort of answered it. The answer is yes. one of the things I said is complementary and integrative expertise. So even if you're very early, you're going to have some level of expertise that's sort of very unique to you, but like that broader, like, well, I've not really led a team this big. You might be an ultrasound specialist and you've demonstrated that through fellowship. It's not like you've got a mountain of publications or grants around that topic, but you've done the work and you have an expertise in it. But if you bring on a co-investigator who has led a larger sort of study of that size or of that type, and you say, well, you don't have a lot of biostats, okay, we'll get a biostatistician on. So sort of fitting all the pieces together. I was telling our group before, sometimes you want to spoon feed your reviewers. They have to write a review. They have to write the investigator section, and I have to say, like, these are the positives, these are the negatives. If I can look at the biosketches and go, the PI is an expert in this, they brought on somebody who's an expert in this, they brought on this person who's a cardiologist who's going to help with this, and they have a biostatistician, and I can copy and paste those into mine and be done. If you can make it that easy for me, then the investigator score is good, right? If I go there and say, oh, I don't see any, they're working in the mouth, I don't have a dentist, I don't have an oral surgeon, what, right? I should have that, If those are sort of where the investigator ones come in. And like the one I brought up before, which is, oh, well, they brought all these people together, but I can't tell that they've ever worked together. Do they even know each other? Because you can't always tell that from a biosketch unless you specifically say, yes, we've worked together on this. This person was my mentor in a previous project.